Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back. We are going to super serve the men in our audience now. And if you're a man, maybe you know somebody that's close to you that is going through some challenges, there's help. A lot of times men hold it inside. They don't really talk about their challenges. We're all going through a lot of the same stuff. And that could be your relationship is not right. Your job is not right. You have a lack of confidence. You just want to get your spark back. We're going to give that to you with the XY spark. And that's what he offers in terms of life coaching. This gentleman has been doing this for at least a decade in helping men empower them as a psychotherapist and men's life coach. And he's back with us here. Rolando Hyman joins us on the program. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Steve. I'm so excited to be here. And, the podcast, that network, it's amazing to be here with you guys to share. So thanks for having me, Steve.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. And you have some very important things that we're going to talk about and share. First off, what do you hear from most men that you work with in the beginning? The majority, everybody's different, everybody's situation is different. What is the underlying thing that you're hearing from men these days that they're challenged by?
One of the main things that I've noticed about men, Steve, that's a very good question, is that a lot of men, they don't feel supported. They don't feel heard. A lot of men feel that when I'm going through rough patches, there's nowhere for me to go. Nobody understands, and for example, a popular artist that we have, his name is Dax. He released a tune that says Nobody Cares, and it is selling millions. And he's doing that song from the perspective of men. And a lot of men, they feel like nobody cares because of the experiences that they have had and because of some of the barriers that society has set up for them, as well as the expectations of society.
Do you think a lot of that is our society where men are typically not allowed to express emotion, even when they were as boys? It was like, oh, big boys don't cry. Come on, stop crying, stop. You're suppressed. And at the same time, I recently learned, and I've heard this in a number of different places, that a boy's emotional intelligence is much higher than a girl's when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, much higher, completely the opposite of what we would think. However, they're told big boys don't cry, stop, be a man, be a man. But at that point, they don't know how to deal with it. And that's why some say, boys are crazy. They're always running around because they don't know how to deal with it. All of that. What are your thoughts on that, Rolando?
Steve, that sometimes is cultural. Sometimes there is this cultural belief that men are supposed to be or fit into a certain realm. And if he steps out of that was set up by culture or society, that, hey, he's failing. He's not being a man. He needs to man up.
Yeah.
And the idea behind that, Steve, is what really does it mean to man up? And how does a kid, a boy, if I can speak from my own experience, I can relate to that. You're a man, let's say you're walking in the community, you're playing sport, you're riding your bike, you fall down, you bruise a knee. Okay? Culture and society says, get up, brush that knee off, don't express any pain, and smile and walk away because you don't want anyone to see you as being a failure to the masculine norm.
Yep.
And so we want to really start there by challenging some of the things that culture has handed down to us. And when I say culture, I mean grandmas hand stuff down, and grandfathers and fathers hand stuff down to us that was handed down to them. And they're carrying that flame without recognizing that something needs to change. But what and how do we do it? Because if I try to do it, then my culture and my community may see me as weak.
And I believe this goes back to even prehistoric times where the man typically wasn't even home. He was gone for a month at a time. He didn't even spend family time. Now it's different. Men spend more time with their family, but they're not wired to deal with that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And what part of what I do for work, Steve, is I challenge men to change perspective whereby asking for help is not weakness, it's wise. Okay? And we have to start challenging that perspective as men as we seek to become the best version of ourselves. And so through the work that I do with men, I oftentimes get into places where I'm challenging that. I'm challenging the cultural piece. I'm challenging the societal piece because out of that is where the personality and the perspective is formed. So now here you have a boy who was properly molded within the context of that system whereby they were taught. And now he's a man, and you're telling him that that system that you were a part of was actually flawed. How do you confront that?
Hmm. I want to go to your journey, Rolando. What got you here helping other men?
You know, that's a very delicate question, Steve. And the thing I appreciate is transparency for me is key. Because what got me here, Steve, is I grew up in a really rough neighborhood. Rough neighborhood. Okay. I grew up in urban Kingston, Jamaica.
Uh,
And
Wagwan, by the way. I had a feeling you were from Jamaica.
Steve, you're not too far off. With a little more training, you'll get it. But I'll give you a grade for that. But
I didn't mean to interrupt.
what I was exposed to, Steve, from early out in my own experiences, I grew up around some young men who, even today, I say they were brilliant young men, but they did not have the mentorship and the guidance that they needed. And I saw a lot of these young men at a time in my life, Steve, when in space of 2 years, I lost anywhere between 10 to 14 of my childhood friends.
Wow.
Okay.
Sorry.
And that traumatized me to that place where, in my mind, I said to myself, what can I do to connect with more men and boys to try to show that there is a healthier, safer, saner way to go? And so from that, Steve, I eventually left that community and I started to go on my own journey. I found faith. I connected with different men who were going in different directions. And deep down inside of me, I still had this passion. How do I help? So then when I finished studying, I started to do a lot more research because the passion was I need to become a safe space for more men. And so my work continued. I did more research, I did more reading, but most importantly, Steve, this is it. I had to come to grips with what my reality was. So I spent so many years doing my own therapy, talking about my own issues, dealing with my own traumas. And that's why, Steve, I consider myself to be a qualified person, not just based on my own academic exposure, but also practical exposure and learning and understanding. So that is what got me here, being a life coach, my own personal life experience, along with my own academic learning and research. And as I continue to evolve into becoming the best version of me, I want to share that with the community as well.
Can you tell us what it felt like when you got to that point in your life where you said, Things are good. Yeah. I'm finally here. I've arrived. Do you remember that moment and what it felt like?
Steve, let me say this to you. I've never put myself in that position where I say I've arrived because of one of my mantra. What I've discovered is this, Steve, that personal development is not an event, it's a lifestyle. So every single day, Steve, I'm working on me. Every single day, I'm seeking to become better. And why? Because life is not static. And this quote I borrowed from one of my mentors back in the day. And he would say this, gentlemen, life is not static, it's dynamic. And so I'm ever growing, ever evolving, ever working on myself. So for me to say, hey, I've arrived, I'm on a journey, Steve, and the journey continues to evolve every single day.
I'm right there with you, and I'll clarify that question. Where on your journey, and I remember one of those moments for me a couple of years ago where I was always worrying about stuff, and what if this happens, what if that happens, and there was some big stuff, life-changing things that were staring me down at that
Mhm,
moment. And I remember a couple of years ago, I walked outside this building and I
mhm,
just looked up at the sun. I could tell you the angle, just remember it. And I call it my quiet calm. I just said, yeah, it's all good. What am I worried about? It's all gonna work out. What
mhm,
what what's the big worry?
mhm,
Everything all kind of figures itself out if you're plugged into it and you see those things and you have faith in yourself and also in the universe.
mhm.
Just whatever you want to however you want to define what this thing called the universe is. Some people connect it to religion. I'm not even going there. If that's you, that's fine. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, but it takes that, and I think a lot of men, and like you said, it's a journey. Still got much more to go.
Yes.
But do you feel a lot of men lack confidence in themselves, in their in the universe, everything, but they're afraid to admit it, maybe even afraid to admit it to themselves?
Absolutely. Because remember, one of the pieces, Steve, is that we were taught how to be everything else, but we were not taught how to be human.
Hmm.
Why? Which is why many of us as men, we have not allowed ourselves to feel. Okay. Ironically, I play soccer with a group of men, and I never forget this. As I was sitting in the group of the men, that probably happened a month and a half ago. Here we are in a group of men, just finished playing a game, and one of the guys uttered, "What you talking about? We're men. What feelings are you talking about?" I'm like, there you go. It's 2024. And here you have a grown man who is saying, what feelings are you talking about? We don't have time to feel. And that came up because we were saying to the guy, hey, when you say that, you may offend the other player or the other guy. And his response was, what feelings are you talking about? So many of us, Steve, as men, we see that as a flaw. But when we allow ourselves to be human, we'll feel. We'll acknowledge limitations. We'll ask for help. We'll be okay to say, hey, guess what? I'm struggling and I can't do it. But because we've not learned how to do that, we self medicate. We harm ourselves and we harm our relationships.
Yeah, so true. And a lot of times men don't realize what the emotion they're feeling. They may be feeling anger, but what is anger?
Yeah, yeah. And anger is a secondary emotion it's almost anger is like the ray of the sun. So you're getting the rays, but in the core of it is where the real issue is, attachment, trauma, abuse,
Sadness.
sadness, disappointment, being in situations where we feel trapped and, our self-worth is not where it was. So anger is just a secondary emotion that is like the rays that's coming from the sun itself.
If a man is feeling that anger, maybe it's to an ex, whatever it might be. How does he confront that through you?
Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that you're feeling angry is one of the first things that you need to do. The second thing that you need to do is you need to ask yourself, okay, what about this event or this experience that is triggering the anger? Am I feeling mad at my ex? Am I feeling mad at the decision that I've made? What's fueling this anger in me at this very moment? And then he needs to look at a way to manage that anger in a healthy way, because getting angry about something is not bad. What becomes bad is when the anger is transformed into aggression, where a man is hurting himself or hurting somebody else, or he's destroying property. Because anger is a necessary emotion. We just have to learn how to manage it more effectively.
I have to tell you, Rolando, you are very easy to talk with.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's I could see you working with other men and them feeling comfortable in speaking about what they've got going on, and that they are normal. We deal with things all of us in a different way, because like you said, and I so spot on, that we were brought up by our fathers, then their fathers, then their fathers. Sometimes it wasn't the right way to do it, but they didn't know any better. Our parents did the best they could with what they had. What do they have? Their parents.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
unless it gets figured out, and I truly believe nowadays we're talking about stuff like this, so
Yeah.
these things can get figured out, where if you went back 20 years ago, 30, whatever it might be, you say the word therapy, it's like, oh, you know
Yeah.
jimmy
Yeah.
has a jim ooh, he's got a problem. Now it's a
Yeah.
badge of courage. I'm going to go talk to my therapist. Yeah, I'm calling up Mike. It's all good.
Yeah. And you know what I've learned, Steve? This made me feel hopeful for the future, because I've learned that younger men now are more open to seeking therapy than older men.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I don't know what happened there. Maybe it was social media that made it okay. I don't know, but it's a good thing.
It shifted because you have more young men now. They are realizing that something is out of place here. I need to work on this. So a lot of our younger men, they're more emotionally intelligent than the men who are more experienced or have been on the planet a little longer, because they are exposing themselves more to other realities. Like, life is just not here. Life also happens here and here. And so uh, men are learning more now how to function, not just in the physical realm, but in the emotional realm, the psychological realm, and the spiritual realm.
I love the way you put that. And the spiritual thing is important. And I feel a lot of men don't realize what even it means. The spiritual thing, what is it? Again,
Yeah.
we're not necessarily connecting it to religion, but
No.
explain it.
The thing about it is, here's what I've discovered. A lot of persons that hear about spirituality, they shy away from it. Like, no, no, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to talk about that. And I smile at it, because there are so many other things that we try without even questioning it.
Hmm.
We try drugs, we try alcohol, we try everything else. But when someone says, hey, consider spirituality. And I define spirituality as this way: seeking to find and connect with a power or a source that is outside of yourself that can keep you grounded. That's how I define it. So go on that journey. Seek to get, for some persons, it's, as you say, Some persons they find God, some persons they find other ways of meditating, of staying connected with themselves. And that's the piece about spirituality, is recognizing that we are not just physical. We're psychological, we're social, we're spiritual, we're emotional, we're sexual, right? And it goes on and on. But we spend a lot of time exploring all the other realms. But
Sure.
when you think spiritual, no, I don't. Stay away from me.
It's probably also because it's not tangible. Yes, when you reach for a drug, a
Yeah,
bottle, whatever
yeah,
it is, I got it. I'm going to do it. It's probably going to make me feel better. When we talk about the spiritual thing, you can't see it. You can't taste it. You get none of that. But
hmm,
I also look at it as a way of reconnecting with yourself.
yes,
Who am I? What am I about? How do I react to things? As opposed to just running on autopilot. And a lot of times the autopilot is the stuff that we learned as kids, which is still running in the background. And we're
hmm,
now now we're adults and I don't want to say we're acting like kids, but we're acting as if it was back in, the high school or the schoolyard at 7 years old. Once you figure it out and you're connected with yourself and grounding,
yeah,
definitely grounding is a big part of it. And again, once you start learning these things, grounding could be as simple as going outside and digging some dirt. You're grounded.
yeah, 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 absolutely. You know, uh, I tapped into this, Steve, that it really caused me to reevaluate my own journey. And this is what I tapped into. As I did research, I came upon the expression and the term intellectual humility. And intellectual humility, Steve, it challenges us to ask this question, and I'm quoting now this question: what if all that I was taught is flawed? End quote. And when I tapped into that, Steve, I said to myself, what if? What does that mean for Rolando? Where does that leave me? And the answer is this: that
Hmm.
leaves me out in a space where I need to go on that journey to get to know myself. And a lot of men, we we're too busy for that because that's too much work.
Yeah, yeah. Until you start figuring how important it is to change your life.
Mhm,
And when you think of, it's a great way to look at things, Rolando. When you think of what you've been taught is flawed,
mhm.
let's be honest. Some of it is, some of
Yeah.
it isn't. But
Mhm,
it's almost as if, well, I got a clean slate now. I
mhm,
can, it's almost like the trunk of your car. I can put in the things I want to put in there now, as opposed to what was put in
mhm.
back in the day that I'm dealing with. And that, sometimes that even comes to relationships. Sometimes you need to take a look and say, this was my aha moment about 3 years ago.
Yes.
Went through a
Yes.
life change, and a close friend of mine said, the people over this part of your life, they don't support you anymore. And I was like, wow, what, whoa, whoa, that sounds like I'm the king on the hill. The peons don't support. And then I figured it out. Life is changing. They're not changing in my direction.
Mhm.
We got to let them go. We don't support each other, and that's okay. But it took somebody like that. And by the way, she's a therapist.
Yeah.
So I've known her since I was 17. She's like, this a sage.
Yeah.
But I feel it's almost the same way. If somebody speaks with you, a man talks with you about his life, what's going on, what he's dealing with, you give that perspective that you're not going to get from your family, typically your friends and such. I know that you do a lot with personal development and counseling and helping men along. How does this whole process start?
You know, for me, Steve, I like to start this process by creating first a safe space where a man can tell his story. What's your story? what brought you to this place and where do you want to go? Okay. And from telling his story, we seek to do work on all areas of his life. So any work that I do with men, he's got to be prepared to go down some of those areas that he was ignoring, whether it is a spiritual, a psychological, an emotional, a social place. You know what? We need to go there because this space, this Pandora box, this thing that you have been treasuring, I think is the thing that is seated in your subconscious that is impacting the way you make decisions and the way you interact and react in your relationships. So
there's so much for us to talk about, the reaction and the interaction within your relationships. I think that's half of our lives, especially for men. What's your website? How do we find you?
So you find me, you go to xyspark.org. That's xyspark.org. You find me there. You can find me on social media platforms too. Same thing, xyspark. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook. You can send me a message. You can email me, hyman@xyspark.org. And I'm wide open to chatting with and talking because, one of the pieces that I'm passionate about, Steve, is healthier men make healthier communities. And oftentimes, I'm not discrediting the ability of single moms, but I'm saying if there's a dad in there that was healthy and he was fulfilling his role as a dad, the community would have a lot less younger men and women who are trying to find themselves in all the wrong places.
Totally understand it. And by the way, I'm a single dad, so I get it. Life is busy. Life is definitely for all of us. So xyspark.org, is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Rolando, great talking with you today. So easy to talk with you, and I love your insight, and looking forward next time we get a chance to get together.
Absolutely, Steve. Take care.
You too. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.